Okay, in the last video we talked about the factors that can push a population out of Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium, meaning the factors that can cause evolutionary change. It can change those predicted phenotype, those predicted allele frequencies in a population. The last one that I want to hit on is selection, so natural selection. And natural selection, as we've already defined, is basically when some organisms are better adapted at their environment than others. They survive and reproduce at a faster rate, affecting the offspring, and that's going to change the allele frequencies in the next generation. Let's look at 3 ways that selection, natural selection, can affect a population. So here's the original population. And in this case, we have lots of different fur color. We have white down here, and the histogram here represents how common those fur colors are. So kind of a nice brown is the average fur color. There's white at one end and black on the other end. And so white and black mice, not very common. Brown mice are very common. Okay? So if something affected the population, let's say the climate changed and the woods got more shady and black mice could hide better, then over time the population will shift. White mice and light brown mice go away and black mice become a little more common. Dark brown mice become more common. So we have a change in what is average. That's going to be a change in allele frequencies, right? That's called directional selection. When the population shifts in one direction, one of those colors becomes more and more common. One end of that spectrum of diversity becomes more and more common. That's directional selection. Now, what if the habitat changed and in one area there was really dark shade and in another area there was a white beach? Well, those white mice can hide on the white beach from predators. Those dark mice might hide in the dark shade. Maybe the brown mice are easy to see. And so we come back in 10 years and we see a lot of white mice and we see a lot of dark mice, but everyone else is gone. That's called disruptive selection, when that original distribution has shifted into 2 different distributions. And this could lead to speciation over time, where if the white mice and the black mice here are never interbreeding with each other, they're going to accumulate their own mutations in their own habitats differently. And when they eventually meet back up, they may not be able to mate anymore. So that potentially could theoretically lead to speciation over a long time. Another type of effect of natural selection is making a species more and more adapted to its habitat, and that's called stabilizing selection. That's when you come back after 10 years after seeing that first mouse population, and now everyone in the population is brown, and there's just a little bit of variation there. Everything has become more average, basically, and that is known as stabilizing selection. These are 3 theoretical ways that natural selection might affect a population. So you could have directional selection followed by stabilizing selection, for example. You know, we could combine these depending on what's going on in the environment. So directional selection, what was extreme is now more common. Disruptive selection, what was average is now rarer, and what was extreme is now more common. But in this case, you have 2 different extremes that are more common. Stabilizing selection, the extremes have gone away and average has become more common. So natural selection increases the frequencies of those alleles that work well in the environment for survival and for reproduction. Now, adaptive evolution, meaning when organisms can adapt to their environment, that occurs when those favorable traits become more and more common, right? And only natural selection can do that. Drift, flow, those other things, they don't cause adaptive evolution. They don't adapt an organism to its population. But bear in mind that the Earth is always changing. Climates change, usually not as fast as they do now, but climates change, habitats change, species come in and out, and things change. So it's a moving target. You adapt to a habitat, but that environment will change over time. So adaptive evolution is always continuous and dynamic. You're never done evolving because things are always changing. That's why one of the reasons you can never have a perfect species, because for a habitat, because soon that habitat will change. A new predator will be introduced, or a food source will disappear, or rainfall patterns will shift, and things will change. One type of natural selection is sexual selection, which, once again, it's who has the best chance of reproducing here. And there are two types of sexual selection. Intrasexual selection, that's when members of the same sex fight each other for a mate. Normally they fight, sometimes they dance or whatever. When two members fight for a mate, and that's why a lot of animals have antlers or horns for intrasexual selection. A lot of them don't even use antlers or horns to fight off predators, they use them to fight each other. And then intersexual selection. Sorry, the duck is covering it up here, but that's when a mate chooses who they will mate with. Usually the female chooses which male she wishes to mate with. And so you can identify those kinds of organisms because they've evolved brightly colored feathers or impressive dances or whatever to show how fit they are. By the way, I have not defined fitness in this class yet. Fitness, you've heard the term survival of the fittest. Fitness means the ability to survive and reproduce. It doesn't mean strength or anything like that. In the case of evolution, it means the ability to survive and reproduce. So the stronger you are, maybe, or the better genes you have, maybe the more colorful you are, the more you can dance, whatever. You're good at getting food in that environment, therefore you're more colorful, therefore you're more likely to have babies, that kind of a thing. So intersexual selection is when a mate chooses a mate. Intrasexual is when mates fight. Two competing members of the same sex fight for a mate. And those are forms of natural selection. Those that have the right genes, to have the right colors, or the strongest antlers, or whatever, are the ones that survive to reproduce. So here, for example, we see a male peacock with a great big bushy tail feather. How is his fitness increased? How might his fitness actually be decreased? A lot of times, attracting a mate is a compromise between one type of fitness and another. In this case, having a big tail shows that you have lots to eat, that you are healthy, and therefore you might get to mate. But it also makes you slow to run away, and it might make you easier to catch. So it's a trade-off. But bear in mind that from an evolutionary standpoint, the organism that has the most babies is the most fit. So if this peacock with the big showy feathers only gets to live for 2 years, but it has 100 babies, it's more fit than a male peacock with a little tail that lives for 10 years but only has 20 babies. Okay? Fitness is all about who survives and leaves the most offspring in the next generation. So let's end this video with a couple of scenarios. A species of mouse lives in a lush green forest with a lot of canopy cover. There are various phenotypes, including light-colored and dark-colored phenotypes. Which color would be selected for on a dark forest floor? Well, if you had a mouse that was light and dark, the light mouse is going to be eaten, leaving the dark mouse, right? Just like in the case, let's remove predators from the equation. In the peacock example, peacocks naturally have variation in their tail feather lengths. Some males have a little bit bigger feathers. Females find them more attractive. Therefore, longer tail feathers have more babies. Therefore, the next generation has bigger tails. And that trait gets selected for by the female mate choice. Okay, so what if you had a mouse that lived in a habitat, you had dark mice and you had light mice, but somehow the grass turns purple? You have dark mice and you have light mice, but suddenly the grass has turned purple. Dark mice can't hide in purple grass. Light mice can't hide in purple grass. What happens now? Answer this question. What happens now? Say something out loud. Sometimes students will have the idea that, well, maybe a mutation will happen, changing the mice to purple, and then they'll be able to hide. But that's not really going to happen. Mutations are random. They don't give you what you need. They're just random events, and they have to have occurred earlier. You have to have had variation in your population. You would have to have had white mice, dark mice, and purple mice if purple mice were going to have survived this event. But because you only had black mice and white mice, and now the grass is purple, what will really happen is owls will now eat the white mice and the black mice, and you will have extinction. The population will die out. So you have to have that existing diversity for evolution to work, for natural selection to allow that population to survive. Okay, so natural selection is really an editor of alleles. Natural selection does not create new alleles. It only gets rid of alleles that don't work. Mutation is a random process that gives rise to new alleles. Natural selection removes non-useful phenotypes. So how do we maintain genetic diversity? Well, we'll talk about that in the next video.